Actually, that's a bit high. Okay, brilliant. Well, welcome. I hope you've enjoyed the burgers, the hot dogs, and a little bit of a taste of summer in the middle of winter. Actually, I'm quite looking forward to summer. As I said last night, I'm off to New Zealand in 3 weeks' time, so I really will get to have a summer party for Christmas. But we're not going to New Zealand tonight. We're staying here. But we're thinking about the subject of success. What is success? It's a big question, isn't it? I wonder what you think success would be. Is success getting a first in your course, or is success simply passing your course and getting to the end of it? Is success getting that graduate career path that you always wanted, or is success just avoiding a job at McDonald's at the end of your degree? What would you say success is? We can have success in different areas of life, academically, sportingly, relationally. What would you say success is? So actually tonight, why don't you just turn to the people around your table and just for 2 minutes, see if you can define or at least share what you think success might be from your opinion, okay? Just share it with the people around your table for 1 minute, okay? Awesome. You could probably carry on those conversations for much longer, couldn't you? It's good to think about different types of success that we might aim at. Now I wonder tonight, when you think about the fact you've come to an event organised by the Christian Union, you're going to hear a Christian speaker speak about the subject of success. I wonder what you expect me to say. I wonder what you expect me to think about success. And you might be coming along thinking that what I'm going to say is that success is bad. That success should be avoided at all costs. That success is dangerous. You might think that's the kind of Christian response to success. I mean, sporting success, well, isn't that trivial? Educating success, success in education, well, isn't that dangerous? Maybe for those people of faith, if you start using your mind, maybe it would compete with your beliefs. And relationship success, well, isn't that just a distraction from spiritual things? That's what we might think about how a Christian would view success. But actually, what I want to say tonight is success is a really good thing. It's a really good thing, not a bad thing at all. In fact, all of us are already in many ways successful. You made it into this university, so you've achieved success, and maybe you've achieved success in lots of different areas too. Success is a really good thing. And of course, no one sets out in life to be a failure. Well, I've never found anyone that has. My ambition in life is to fail at everything. Some people do, but it's not our ambition. Success is good. And success as a Christian, I would say, is a really good thing. Listen to this successful Christian athlete, Eric Liddell. Eric Liddell was in the 1924 Olympic Games. He was due to run in one event and then had to run last minute in a different event that he hadn't trained for, and yet still won the gold medal. And the film Chariots of Fire follows his life. If you've not seen the film, you've almost certainly heard the music because it was played every medal ceremony last year in the Olympic Games. And the film Chariots of Fire follows his story, and this is what Eric Liddell said. He said, "God made me for a purpose, but he also made me fast. And when I run, I feel his pleasure." So actually for Eric Liddell, sport and success in sport wasn't a distraction, a bad thing, but he says actually it was part of his life, part of his enjoyment as a Christian was to be able to run and to be able to run fast and to be successful in that way. And I want to say success, whether it's in a sporting way, whether it's in education, or whether it's in successful relationships, I want to endorse that and say, yeah, as a Christian, those things are really, really good. And actually, comparing that to the worldviews of some people, actually, I would say this is far more attractive. Listen to Patricia Churchland, an ethicist from America and a materialist. She says, the principal chore of brains is to get the body parts where they should be, in order that the organism may survive. A fancier style of representing the world is advantageous as long as it enhances the organism's chances for survival. So actually, all those other aspects of success are rather trivial for Patricia Churchland, provided you get your body parts in the right place to reproduce, which is a rather empty view of success. So success is a good thing, according to the Bible, according to God. But success alone, a life built upon success alone, can be profoundly dissatisfying. If that is the very foundation of our life, And there are many people who have achieved great success and found that to be exactly the case. Listen to a few of them. Boris Becker, here he is. He said this. We'll come to Schumacher, we'll stick with the Germans. Boris Becker said, "I had won Wimbledon twice before. Once as the youngest player ever, and I was rich and I had all the material possessions I needed. Money, cars, women, everything. But I was no longer successful. Everything was black. I was on dead-end streets. I had no inner peace. I was a puppet on a string." Incredible success, and yet incredible emptiness. And then Michael Schumacher, after winning the championship, said this, "The championship was great for me, but somehow I'm not satisfied. There must be something more than what I have. Then this is what I'm looking for." And I wonder if he found it. Maybe that was behind his reason to come back into Formula One and have another go. That sense of emptiness that was still there afterwards. Or listen to Madonna, who's achieved probably the greatest success in pop music in the last generation. And yet she said, "I have an iron will, and all of my will has always been to conquer some horrible feeling of inadequacy. I push past one spell of it to discover myself as a special human being, and then I get to another stage and think I'm mediocre and uninteresting again and again. My drive in life is from this horrible fear of being mediocre, and that's always pushing me, because even though I've become somebody, I still have to prove I'm somebody. My struggle has never ended, and it probably never will." That sense in which you can achieve great success, but soon that buzz disappears and you have to achieve more, you have to become something else. That continual struggle for success. J.D. Rockefeller, the great entrepreneur and multi-millionaire in America, once was asked the question, "How much money is enough?" And he said, "Just a little bit more, just a little bit more. No matter how much you have, just a little bit more." Or listen to Russell Brand, speaking about this culture of celebrity and this desire for success in terms of popularity. This is in an interview with Jeremy Paxman, not the most recent one, but the one before that. He said, and I won't try and say it as fast as he says it because you won't be able to understand what I'm saying, but he says this, "What happens is the initial thrill of achievement, which is the same as if you've acquired a new pair of shoes that you've long craved, and then you realise the shoes are too tight. They ain't that comfortable. I want another pair of shoes. Walking around in these things ain't the same as I thought it would be. You realise you need nutrition from a higher source, something more valuable. Celebrity in and of itself is utterly, utterly vacuous. It's like being presented with a glorious meal, but when you taste it, there's no taste, no succour, no nutrition. It's tiresome." And yet we live in an age where people strive after and long for celebrity, popularity, and success in those ways. But he says it's empty, like a meal that has no nutrition. So success can be a good thing, but success alone can be profoundly dissatisfying, as many people have discovered. Now you might be sitting there thinking, well, hang on a minute, that's Michael Schumacher and he's German, or maybe that's Madonna and whatever. But hang on a minute, why should we be any different? I know the difference at the moment is that many of us are still expecting and hoping for things in the future, whereas these people have made it. But what makes us think that if we achieve our dreams, our hopes and our ambitions, that we'll find more satisfaction and that we won't find also the emptiness that came with theirs? Well, I wanted to look tonight at an encounter that Jesus had with an incredibly successful person. And it's in these little books, so you could pick up those books now, just so you can follow along. And it's on page 122. And chapter 18, you might call it, that's how it's been split up. And it's the verse 18, the little verse number 18 down the page. So if you open that up, and then Ruth's going to come up and read that encounter to us. Thanks, Ruth.
A certain ruler asked him, "Good teacher, what must I do to inherit eternal life?" "Why do you call me good?" Jesus answered. "No one is good except God alone. You know the commandments. You shall not commit adultery. You shall not murder. You shall not steal. You shall not give false testimony. Honor your father and mother." "All these I have kept since I was a boy," he said. When Jesus heard this, he said to him, "You still lack one thing. Sell everything you have and give to the poor, and then you will have treasure in heaven. Then come, follow me." When he heard this, he became very sad because he was very wealthy. Jesus looked at him and said, "How hard it is for the rich to enter the kingdom of God. Indeed, it is easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for someone who is rich to enter the kingdom of God."
Awesome. Thanks, Ruth. Keep those books open because we're just going to look at this encounter for a moment. So here's this guy in this story, and we know from Luke's account of this story that he's a ruler, and we also know that he's very wealthy. And also, if you put this together with two other also accounts of this same story from Matthew and from Mark in the other New Testament documents, we know that not only is he a powerful man and a wealthy man, but he's also a young man. So here's a guy who's really got everything, okay? He's got wealth, he's got youth, he's got power. He's probably about the perfect age. I don't know what the perfect age is to you. I reckon it's probably about 32. Do you reckon? That's me. So he's young. He's loaded. He's got all the money to buy the latest latest edition camels and things like that. And he's powerful. And with that power probably came great respect. He was a ruler in his local community, and people would have looked up to him. And he's got it all at the same time. It strikes me that a lot of people get two of those three things at certain points in their life, but not always three at the same time. We have youth, but we mostly don't have wealth. One day we might have wealth, but the problem is we'll have probably spent our youth trying to achieve it, and we won't have the youth to enjoy it. But here's the guy who's got wealth and youth and power, and it's all at the same time. He's got success. And you might think, what more could someone want? And yet, this guy comes talking to Jesus. And you might think, he's the last kind of person that you would expect to come to Jesus, isn't he? You might expect old people, not young people, because they know they're going to die. And weak people, not powerful people, because they need some kind of crutch. And maybe poor people rather than rich people, because, well, they've got nothing else in life. And yet this guy that's got everything in life comes to speak to Jesus. Now, we're not told why from the passage, but I wonder whether it's because, like the people that we've already looked at, who have known a profound level of success, he also knew a profound level of dissatisfaction with what he had. That you can have everything and yet be missing something. It was brought home to me in a rather amusing way. A few years ago, I was up north in Lancaster speaking at some events at the university there. And I travelled back home to my home in Bournemouth, kind of through the night. I arrived at about 3 in the morning. And I remember getting into my house and just kind of dumped everything in my bedroom, got into my pajamas, got into bed, and was just kind of drifting off to sleep. And I thought to myself, you know what? I have no food for breakfast. I've got no Weetabix. No milk, no Weetabix. What am I going to do? In the morning, I don't know about you, but I have to have breakfast. Otherwise, I'm just not going to function. And I'm thinking, look, it's my day off tomorrow. There's only one thing for it. I'm going to get up. I'm going to go to the 24-hour Tesco. I'm going to do some shopping. So in the morning, I'm ready to go. Okay? So I'm thinking, let's get up, go down the road to get the Weetabix. So you'd be glad to know I got dressed, got into my car, drove down to the Tesco, and I got into the Tesco and I thought to myself, hang on a minute, it's 3 in the morning, there's no one here. It's totally empty. So I'm thinking, let's just do all my shopping now, because then I won't have to do it for at least another month, okay? And, I don't know, people talk about retail therapy, I need therapy after the retail. So I hate shopping being a bloke. So I kind of go around and get one of those super-sized family trolleys. And then I think to myself, well, also, because it's 3 o'clock in the morning, I noticed that lots of things are on special offer. They're trying to sell them off. And particularly in the bakery, donuts, 10p for a packet of donuts. I'm I'll have 5 of them. And so I'm going around, loading up this trolley, just all this stuff. And then I get to the checkout and there's no one there, so I just kind of sail straight through and put it into bags back home, stick it in the cupboards, get into bed, and I'm just drifting off to sleep. And I think to myself, forgotten the Weetabix. The one thing that I'd set out to get was the one thing that I didn't have. I could eat donuts all day, but I'd gone to get Weetabix. Now, it's a silly story, it's sadly true, but it's an example, isn't it, sometimes of our lives, that we can fill our lives with so much, particularly in the West, and yet feel that there's something that might be missing. And maybe that was the case for this guy as well. So he comes to Jesus and he asks him a question. He says, "Good teacher, what must I do to inherit eternal life?" And it's interesting because Jesus doesn't answer his question, does he? He doesn't just say, this is the answer, but he asks him a question. Verse 19, he says, "Why do you call me good?" Which is rather intriguing, isn't it? He's just said, "What must I do to inherit eternal life?" Well, think about it. What is this guy assuming by his question when he asks Jesus, "What must I do to inherit eternal life?" He's assuming that basically there's something that he can do, that he could be good enough to get it. And if he could achieve a certain level of goodness, then he'll be in. So Jesus says, "Why do you call me good?" And then he says, "No one is good except God alone." He's getting him to think through his own standards of goodness and think about whether he's actually really good enough. And then he carries on by looking at some of the commandments. He says in verse 20, "You know the commandments: you shall not commit adultery, you shall not murder, you shall not steal, you shall not give false testimony, honor your father and mother." And how does this guy respond? Well, to verse 21, "All these I've kept since I was a boy," he said. Now, it's interesting because Jesus is quoting here from the Ten Commandments in the Old Testament. The first few that were to do with our relationship to God, and the next are to do with our relationship to each other. And there's one that's deliberately, I think, missing. And that's the commandment not to be greedy, not to be jealous. And I think Jesus has deliberately left it out. And yet this guy, who probably knew the Bible quite well, doesn't spot it. He just says, "I'm fine, I've kept them." And so then Jesus asks him to do something else, which reveals the problem even more clearly. And he said, verse 22, "You still lack one thing. Sell everything you have and give to the poor, and then you'll have treasure in heaven, and then come and follow me." So go and sell all your stuff and follow me. Now, is Jesus saying, therefore, that if you're going to become a Christian, if you're not yet, if you're going to become a Christian, you have to sell everything you have? Is that kind of blanket command for everyone who wants to follow Jesus? I don't think it is, for a couple of reasons. Firstly, because for some of us, we haven't got much to sell. So it wouldn't be very hard, would it? I mean, actually, we could just sell our debts. Can you sell a debt? That'd be kind of cool if you could. We haven't got much to sell, so it wouldn't be very hard for us. And secondly, in theory, it would therefore mean that there's one person in the world that can never become a Christian, because they would end up with everything that everyone else has given away. So clearly Jesus is not saying this is a blanket command for everyone. He doesn't say it to everyone who comes to him, but he does say it to this man. Why? Because he's putting his finger very clearly on the area of this man's life that is the real problem. He's saying to him, what is your life really being built on? What's the foundation of your life? And for this guy, it's quite obvious, isn't it? It's his wealth. And everything that his wealth will give him. And that's his foundation. Now, I'm guessing great vast amounts of wealth is not currently the foundation that most of our lives are being built on. If it is, you can see me later. And you can pay for more than £1 for the books. But for most of us, it's not at the moment. Of course, it might be the hope of getting it in the future. But it could be other areas of success, couldn't it? Success isn't just financial, it can be relational. Hoping that that relationship will satisfy, or hoping that sporting success will satisfy. Success in all sorts of areas we could substitute here. And Jesus says, what are you building your life on? What's the foundation? What's the one thing that you say, if I have that, my life will be complete, and if I don't have it, my life won't be worth living? What's your most important thing? Now, Jesus isn't saying that wealth is a bad thing. Wealth is very useful, isn't it? Very hard to live life without any money whatsoever. And there are lots of things that can be good, like we said. Sporting success can be good, relationships can be good. We're not against those things. But actually, when a good thing becomes the ultimate thing in your life, it can become a bad thing, because then it's become a God thing. It's become the most important thing. I think there's a couple of reasons why that's a really bad idea. Firstly, because when we build our life on something other than God, that's actually really offensive to God. So think of it this way. If there is a God who's made you, given you your intellectual abilities and your sporting abilities for those of you that have them, and all sorts of abilities, your ability to have relationships and love, and God has given you all of these gifts, but what if we were to take those gifts and ignore the giver? I mean, imagine if at Christmas time, For those of you that have got nieces and nephews, you go out and splash out money on a niece or a nephew and you give them that present, and then they just open it up and they play with the present, but they don't even look at you. They never say thank you. They ignore you. Maybe that's happened. But it's hard, isn't it? Because we want people to enjoy gifts in the context of a relationship with the giver. And God says, I've given you these gifts to enjoy, but how offensive if we take the gifts and we ignore the giver who gave them to us. But also, I think it's a really bad idea to base our lives on these things, ultimately, because they won't satisfy, as we've already seen. See, look at how this guy responds to what Jesus tells him to do. Verse 23, when he heard this, he became very sad because he was very wealthy. You might think this guy gets to the end of the story and goes like, no, Jesus, I'm not going to follow you. And he gets home and he's like, phew, that was a close one. I've got my money and I'm happy. But actually, this guy goes away sad. It's a real profound sadness in the story that this guy comes so close and yet he's so far. He sees the emptiness of all that he has, and yet somehow he's not willing to let go of it. There's a sadness to it. Because we've said these things will never ultimately satisfy. And if we seek to build our lives on these things, we're setting ourselves up for a disappointment. I don't know, have you seen the film Cool Runnings? Who's seen the film Cool Runnings? Okay. Brilliant film, isn't it? It would have to be there in my top 5. I watch it like once a year, just for fun. And I love watching it with new people. So if you've never watched Cool Runnings, maybe we'll have to meet up this week and watch it together. Cool Runnings is one of my favourite films. If you've not watched it, watch it tonight. Go home, get it on Netflix or whatever. And it tells the story of the Jamaican bobsleigh team. And just a brilliant story. And there's these two characters in the film. There's a guy called Irv, played by the late John Candy. He's the coach of the bobsleigh team. And he was thrown out of the Olympics years before for cheating in the bobsleigh by hiding weights in the bob. And is it called a bob or a bobsleigh? The bob? It just sounds like funny, doesn't it? Anyway, for hiding weights in the thing that goes down the track. And he's the coach, and this is Derice. He's the captain of the bobsleigh team. And Derice discovers the reason why Irv has been thrown out of the Olympics. And so as they get to Calgary for the Winter Olympics, Derice says to Irv one night before their big race, "Boss, why did you cheat? Why did you cheat? You had 5 gold medals. You had it all. Why did you cheat?" And Irv says, "A gold medal is a wonderful thing." Sorry, he says, "I have made winning my all. And when you make winning your all, you've got to win." He says, "A gold medal is a wonderful thing, but if you're not enough without it, you'll never be enough with it." See, success is a wonderful thing, but when you make it your everything, you'll never be enough, and it will never be enough to satisfy. Or to think about the film Chariots of Fire, not quite so humorous, but also very good. Chariots of Fire tells the story of 2 people. One, Eric Liddell, a Christian athlete who achieves great success, and another man, Harold Abrahams, who also achieved great success. But for him, success was everything. For him, success was the be-all and end-all. And he said, "I'm 24, and I've never known contentment. I'm forever in pursuit, and I don't even know what I'm chasing. And now in 1 hour's time, I'll be out there again. I'll raise my eyes and look down that corridor 4 feet wide and with 10 lonely seconds to justify my existence. But will I?" And he wins the gold, but he doesn't get what he really wants. And he's profoundly dissatisfied, and he leaves sad. Or even more profound, listen to David Foster Wallace. David Foster Wallace was an American author, and he says this in a very interesting way. He says, "You get to decide what to worship, because here's something else that's true. In the day-to-day trenches of adult life, there's actually no such thing as atheism." Now listen carefully to what he's saying. He's not saying that everyone is a Christian by any means. He says there is no such thing as not worshipping. Everybody worships. The only choice is we get is what to worship. When he's talking about worship there, he's not talking about religious worship in a place like this. He's just talking about what you live for, the thing that is most important in your life, the thing that you give your dedication to. He says we all have to dedicate our lives to something. And then he says, an outstanding reason for choosing some sort of God is that pretty much anything else you worship will eat you alive. If you worship money and things, you'll never have enough. Worship your own body and beauty and sexual allure, and you'll always feel ugly. And when time and age starts showing, you'll die a million deaths before they finally plant you. Worship power, you'll feel weak and afraid, and you'll need ever more power over others to keep the fear at bay. Worship your intellect and being seen as being smart, and you'll end up feeling stupid, a fraud, always on the verge of being found out. He says when you live for those things, there's a real emptiness. One of the saddest things about David Foster Wallace is that within a few weeks of saying those words, he'd actually taken his own life. I wonder what he had chosen to worship in his life. But you may be saying, well, this is really bleak, isn't it? What's the solution? What's the answer? Because no one can live for nothing, can they? You can't just say, I'm not going to live for anything, because that's also pretty bleak. The problem is, or the answer is rather, not to stop living for these things, but to start living for something bigger. Actually, to replace these small idols in our lives, to use that kind of terminology, these small gods, with a God who really can satisfy, with a God who really can meet that greatest need of our hearts. And how do you do that? You do that when you see that actually he is profoundly more satisfying than anything else. See, this story is often called the story of the rich young ruler, okay? For obvious reasons. He's rich, he's young, he's a ruler. You could, in many ways, call it the story of the rich young rulers. Because actually, both of the characters in this story, it could be said of. The first, for obvious reasons. But think about Jesus for a minute. He was obviously young. He was in his early 30s as he says these words. But it also says in the Bible that he was a ruler. The title Christ, Anointed One, meant that actually he was God's king. That he actually is the ruler of all things. And he was rich. He was God. He owned everything. And yet, this rich young ruler, who had it all, willingly gave it up all. He gave up his treasure. He gave up everything for us. And he gave up everything to make us his treasure out of love for us. And it's only really when you start to see that the God of the Bible revealed in Jesus is the God who was willing to give up everything for you in your place, taking what you deserve to reconnect you to God. When he was willing to give up everything for you, when you see that, it starts to help you to see that actually maybe giving whatever it takes to get him is not such a bad thing after all. And it's the degree to which you see what he has given for you that actually you'll begin to see that getting him is the most important thing in the world. I'm going to invite Sam to come up, and Sam's going to share his story of how this has become real in his life and the difference that this makes to him. Thank you so much, Sam.
Hi guys. Yeah, basically, I've always been a really driven person. I've always mainly been driven by my successes, to be honest, and wanting to be successful. I think from a young age, I think I valued myself by how successful I was. And I actually, when we were discussing earlier how, what we think success is, I was asked very quickly, is mediocre all right for you? And I quickly said no. And I think, I don't know, I think what when I started to realize, sort of the age of 14, 15, 16, maybe when I started exams, we had your GCSEs and things like that, you would get your results, or you'd have you'd have a big sporting match that you would do well in, and you think, you'd feel on top of the world at that moment, or you'd feel great. You'd just be like, I've really achieved what I wanted. I've had some success. But I wonder how many of you have had that same situation and then actually think, how long's that lasted? How long can you ride that wave of success for? And that's what I started to realize, that it wasn't really everything I wanted, and that I might have got the grades I wanted, but then we move on the next year and I've got another thing to work for. So yeah, I was really at that time I was really encouraged by my parents to get reading the Bible a bit more, because I'd grown up in a Christian household and been going to church, but I'd never really thought about reading the Bible as much as maybe I should have. And I started reading the Bible, and I found that as I grew sort of closer to God and started to pray more and read the Bible, I found a great comfort in what God provided. And actually, when I would go to exams, or I'd have sport and big matches, things like that, I started to find this comfort that actually it didn't matter what happened, and that success wasn't the key here, and that actually God was essentially viewing me an infinite treasure, and that I didn't have to impress anyone by being successful, and I didn't have to impress myself and try and be as, the best, or the most successful, because of this comfort. And this, essentially, it was I found that it was how I valued my success, and essentially my faith became based upon that I valued God far higher than the successes I made, and that was what really helped. So, thank you.
Brilliant. We're going to take a 1-minute break, and if you've not done so yet and you've got a question, this is a good point to text that question in before we have about 10 minutes or so to look at some of those questions. So if you can't think of a question, why not ask the people around your table and say, what question would you like to ask? And then nominate someone that's got free text to text that question in. Okay? And then we'll do that in a second.
Right, sorry, I was messing up the system there. My fault. So yeah, we've had a few come in already, and a few coming in imminently as well, so we'll just try and get through them. So the first question we have is there anything wrong with looking for financial security, not necessarily riches?
No, I don't think so. And actually, I think one of the things about being as a Christian, I want to be a good steward of the resources that God's given to me. And so actually that could be an unhelpful thing, couldn't it? If I just give away everything and then suddenly find myself in a situation where I haven't able to be providing for the people around me or providing for basic needs. And so I think being a good steward of your resources is important. But I think there's a danger that money, like we talk about money being an idol. Like, money itself isn't really an idol, is it? I mean, like, who actually just sits at home and looks at £50 notes? Has anyone ever done that? I mean, like, it would just really, like, or just like your credit card. It's like, ooh, my credit card is so lovely. Like, of course we don't worship money. We worship the things that money gives. And I guess one of the things that money can give us is a sense of security. Now, in the sense that, obviously, I want to manage my finances, I might want to have a pension and things like that. They're not bad things at all. But there's a danger, isn't there, that we can feel that it gives us ultimate security, and it doesn't. Actually, the most profoundly important things in life, money can't buy. And MasterCard ain't going to help you with that either. So actually, there's a danger that we can feel that money will give us security. That's one of the kind of sub-idols of money. And it can't always do that, can it? Whether that's in health or in relationships or other areas. So managing money well, having pension, savings, not a bad thing. But actually, if that's where our confidence lies in our lives, then that can be really fragile, can't it? Okay, good question.
Why are there so many rich Christians in the world? Why does the church have so much money?
Two kind of separate issues. So individual rich Christians, and why does the church have so much money? I guess we'll take the church for a start, and then we'll go back to the individuals. So when it comes to the church, obviously it depends what church you're talking about. You may be talking about one of the state-established churches, like the Church of England or the Catholic Church or things like that. Or you could be talking about individual churches. I'm part of an independent church, and so we don't receive funding from outside our church. It's all funded by people who go to the church, who give the money sacrificially to make things happen. And we operate, but I wouldn't say we have stacks of money, just rolling around with nothing to do with it. We give towards it. Sadly, sometimes through history, the states' churches of various nations have hoarded money, I think, in really unhelpful ways, and sometimes gained money in really unhelpful ways, as was often the case in the Middle Ages. where people thought that you could pay to get forgiveness of your sins or pay to get people out of purgatory. Now, of course, if you're told that your granny's in purgatory and you can give her some money to get her out, that's horrifically emotionally manipulative, isn't it? And so that kind of thing was a horrific abuse, which many people within the church themselves protested against. So I'm not saying the record of the church through history has always been squeaky clean. No, not at all. And I think it's a sad thing that often where the church gains political and financial power, it often loses its vital spiritual life because it's not to be based on that. And I think that's been a really sad thing. But certainly not all churches today, not all churches here in Bath are built on that. So that's kind of church as a kind of establishment. So I just want to say, which one are you thinking about? In terms of individuals, why there's so many rich individual Christians? Proportionately, I don't know the statistics. I would say proportionately, there probably are not, in that actually in the West, we aren't the majority of Christians. The majority of Christians in the world today are living in places like China and Africa and South America, and many of them are not rich. Many of them are living in abject poverty. So there are, of course, in the West, very rich Christians, and Christians that have been successful, like a friend of mine, successful in business, and has sold aeroplanes his working life, and has made millions and millions of pounds. And as I said, success is not a bad thing. If a Christian is given the ability to be able to be successful in business and those kind of ways and to make money, I'm not saying that's wrong. The question is, what do they do with the money that they've been entrusted with? How are they going to be responsible with that? And if they're going to hoard that for their own benefit, actually, that is a really bad idea. But actually, wonderfully, there are lots of Christians in the world who are incredibly generous with their money. So this friend of mine that's had a very successful business has spent his life giving away literally millions and millions of pounds to charitable works, to places all over the world, including me, a charitable work, apparently. I work for a charity. He bought me a car once. He said, my car broke down. He's like, I'll buy you a car. So he's been blessing all sorts of people, including me, which is quite nice. And there are Christians like that who have been given lots of money but then have used it to support, well, not just people like me, but far worthier causes in different parts of the world. And the Bible doesn't, though, give you a kind of list or a kind of rule book of saying this is X amount of money that you must give away. And what it does, though, is give us an example of a God who gave everything up for us, who gave us the ultimate generosity. And then it says, inspired by the generosity that God had for you, be generous in the same way. And that's much better than giving someone a rule, isn't it? So Christians shouldn't be people who are going, how much must I give? But they should hopefully be people who are saying, how much can I give? Because they've been shown generosity themselves, and they want to show that generosity to others, either in financial ways or in other ways as well.
Are there dangers in looking for success in morally good aims, such as running a successful charity?
Are there dangers of getting success in morally good ways? One of the things I said about, well, we call that word idolatry. An idol could be anything that we live for that becomes an ultimate thing in our lives. It doesn't have to be a religious thing. It doesn't have to be made out of gold or silver. And one of the things about idols is that idols don't have to be kind of bad things like, you know, drugs and promiscuous sex and things like that. Idols can be good things that become ultimate things. And actually, one of the dangers of idolatry and dangers of idols is this, that you can take something that seems really good, but make that the foundation of your life. So actually, I could set up a charity to serve others, but make my sense of identity the success of my charity and how it goes and how well I'm doing in it. And even though I might be achieving lots of good, that's also going to be dangerous for me, isn't it? Because my whole sense of well-being, the foundation of my life, is built on what I have done. And therefore it's very, very fragile. What if it falls apart? What if the success doesn't last? And so it's not the thing itself is bad. Absolutely not. There's lots of good things. But anything that becomes an ultimate thing actually ultimately becomes a bad thing, because then we build a fragile foundation for our lives that can easily be taken away.
I think one relevant point is that your measure of success is the same as the measure of the title, material possessions and... Oh, sorry. I'll start again. I think one relevant point is that your measure of success is the same as the measure of title, material possessions and wealth. Could you not define success as experiencing the most possible positive change during your life?
Yeah, I think you could. I don't want to just talk about success in financial, material ways. I guess we could talk about success in all sorts of ways, couldn't we? And success in terms of achieving change or transformation through our lives, achieving our goals, and so on. And like I've been saying, I'm not saying that's a bad thing at all. Actually, the wonderful thing about being a Christian is that part of being a Christian is being changed and transformed through your life to become more of the person you were created to be. And then to be set free to live and to get involved in this world in all sorts of ways. So it's not simply that success has to be in material ways at all. It could be in all sorts of ways. As we've been saying, if we build our foundation on that, it's very fragile. But actually, if our foundation is in knowing God, then all of these things can take on new meaning and joy in the context of that as well. Brilliant. Any more?
Just
One more?
I'm content and satisfied as I am. Why do I need God?
Well, I'm glad you're happy. Obviously, we did a good job with those burgers tonight. Maybe it's more profound satisfaction than that. No, seriously, I really am glad that you're happy. You know, I'm not trying to say tonight, oh gosh, you've got to be kind of depressed and unhappy to start investigating the Christian faith. And if you've achieved satisfaction, if you know happiness, that's a really good thing. As we were saying last night, I guess there's two things you might want to say. One is, we can achieve times and moments, can't we, of satisfaction and happiness in our lives. But does that always last? And does that bear out in the long run? The reality is sometimes we can go through moments of kind of, yeah, I've made it, I'm happy, but then an emptiness returns, like that quote from Madonna. You know, she makes it and she's satisfied for a while. But then the goal bar gets like lifted higher and she has to, or, you know, to achieve more, to make more, to be something else. And so we can achieve satisfaction, but that can be very transitory, can't it? But looking at it another way, I think I'd say this. Some people do have great contentment in life. But what we've been saying this week is that the claims of Jesus are so big that if they are objectively true, whatever our existential feelings about life at the moment, they're worth investigating because the implications are really, really big. Jesus says that actually our response to him and what he's done for us is really important both now and in eternity. As I mentioned last night, he told us a parable, a story about a guy, I think it was last night, it all blurs into one, but I mentioned Jesus tells a story about a rich fool, a guy who has incredible success, incredible money and everything else, and he thinks everything's fine, and then he dies. And the verdict over his life is the verdict that he was a fool, because he had spent his life being rich materially, but had no thought of God. And actually Jesus says it would be profoundly foolish, wouldn't it, if we sit in our lives being content with what we have without ever giving a thought to the fact that there might be something more, and whether God is there, and what that might mean for our lives. That would be really foolish and really unwise. And so whether you feel a real sense of emptiness in your life, or even if you don't, I'd really encourage you to ask those big questions, because I think there will be times when those feelings will be there, and even if they're not, these things are so important that they're still worth looking into. Okay? Guys, brilliant questions. Thank you so much for them. In a minute, you can carry on discussing them around your tables whilst trying to play Jenga and whatever else you want to do. Can I just say, before we finish, a couple of things. Again, as we've said on previous nights, there might be some of you here and you're saying, well, what are these objective claims of Jesus and why would they be so important? And what's the big deal? Well, do take these books that we've been looking at tonight, these Uncover books, and if you've not got a copy yet, take them home and have a read and investigate for yourself those claims and ask yourself the question, if this is true, what difference would this make? And what would that mean for me? So don't just take, your kind of bits and pieces that you've gathered and gleaned over your life from maybe RE lessons and the media and the BBC about religion as your basis for accepting or rejecting the Christian faith. Take one of the source documents and look into it for yourself. It'll take a couple of hours to read, but it'll be a couple of hours really well spent. Could be you're saying, well, actually, if I was to do something about this, I'd really need to look into this more. And so that's why the Christian Union really want to give you lots of opportunities to do that. So there's the other events of this week that Pete will tell you about in a second, but there's lots of other things happening, particularly a course called Uncover that's going to be taking place next week and for the next couple of weeks up until Christmas, and then carrying on after Christmas, I think, as well. And that goes through this book, looks at 6 of the encounters that we've, from this book, encounters with the person of Jesus, and gives you the opportunity just to discuss them and ask questions and think through the implications. And you won't be made stupid for not knowing much. You won't be made to feel bad if you ask kind of obvious questions or hostile questions or kind of questions that assume that you don't believe it. You can look into it. You don't have to even accept that it's true to start looking into it. Okay? So why not sign up for that course called Uncover? We'll tell you how to do that in a second. Or maybe actually there are some who are saying, well, actually, as I've heard about this and I've heard what Jesus is offering, if this is true, I'd really want to know this for myself. And actually, Jesus says to us that this offer of life that starts now and goes on into the future is available today to each one of us. And we don't have to leave like the rich young ruler left, sad and empty, holding on to our stuff and yet missing out on his offer of life. We can receive it. How do you receive it? Well, talk to God. You might want to say something like this: God, I'm sorry for the way that I've kept you out of my life. And I've not really thought about you. God, thank you that you were willing to pay the greatest cost for me and you didn't want to keep me out of yours. And God, please come into my life and help me to know and follow you and to know this joy and this life that you've promised. And if you're thinking about doing that, if you'd like to do that, or if you're wondering what it would mean to do that, then I've got a little booklet here called Yes. And it's for people who are wanting to say yes to the offer of that invitation that Jesus brings. And I'll have some copies. And as you're playing Jenga and whatever else, I'll be wandering around trying to knock the bricks over so I can give you some of these books. And so if you'd like one of these little booklets, do come and see me and I'll give you one for free. If you want to chat, then please do. If you want to chat with the people around your tables or where you are, then please do that as well. You don't need to rush away. Thanks so much for listening. I'll hand back to Pete just to explain the feedback forms and what's coming up after this.
Right, thank you so much. Yeah, I was really struck by that. I know. I just like to plug the Uncovers again. I mean, I became a Christian exactly like that, and it was exactly the same thing with me with success in my life as well. Just trying to define everything by that. So I'm really, really struck by what we've heard tonight. So yeah, please do take the opportunity and go through the Bible or this book of the Bible with someone. Yeah, and as Mike said, you can do that. Tick the tell me more box in the feedback form. Then we'll get back to you, and then we can arrange meeting up with whoever, a group, just one-on-one, whatever, and you can go through the Bible with someone. And the box count me in as if you really think, oh my goodness, this is true, and I'm ready to make this commitment to Jesus. So yeah, please tick that box. Definitely more food, I believe, Matthew Thomas. Look at that nod. There's definitely more food. And 4 more events this week. 2 more lunch bars, 2 more evening events. Tomorrow's a curry night, always rammed. Make sure you get your tickets if you want to go, if you haven't got them yet. Like Mike said, please don't rush off, and please do fill in the feedback forms. Like we said, we really want everyone's feedback, everyone who's here. I think that's all. Fantastic. Thank you, guys.